A single father found a mysterious note in his son's backpack. The author was the teacher who would change his life forever. An unexpected romance, secrets revealed, and a story of love and redemption that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment on where you are watching from. The shrill sound of the alarm clock cut through the silence of the morning in New York City at exactly 6 o'clock. David Johnson, 42 years old, automatically stretched his arm to silence the device, his eyes still heavy from interrupted sleep. It was an ordinary Wednesday in March, and the morning routine repeated itself with the precision of a Swiss watch. Get up, brew coffee, wake Ethan, and organize the boy's school backpack. The house in Little Italy bore the marks of a life built brick by brick. The exposed brick walls, carefully restored by his own hands, told the story of a man who found in preserving the past a way to cope with the uncertainties of the future. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the aroma of the plants in the small garden he cultivated on the balcony. A project. He had started to teach Ethan about responsibility. "Dad, I can't find my math notebook," shouted Ethan from his room, his voice carrying that characteristic tone of despair of an 8-year-old facing another school day. David smiled, drying his hands on the dish towel embroidered by his grandmother, one of the few feminine memories left in the house after the divorce. "Calm down, buddy. Let's look together." The boy appeared in the kitchen still in his pajamas, his brown hair tousled into small, rebellious tufts. His green eyes, a maternal inheritance, carried an expression of worry disproportionate to the situation. David knew that look well. Ethan always got anxious when he couldn't organize his things, a trait that had intensified since they discovered his mild dyslexia. "Take a deep breath, champ. Remember what Aunt Sarah taught? When we get nervous, things become harder to find." Ethan nodded, mimicking the breathing exercises the educational psychologist had taught. David watched his son with pride. The boy was learning to cope with his difficulties with a maturity that sometimes surprised him. Together they headed to Ethan's room. The space reflected the boy's eclectic personality, shelves filled with adapted children's books, models of historical buildings they built on weekends, and drawings scattered across the desk. David had painted the walls a soft blue, creating an environment that was both stimulating and calming. "Let's check the backpack first," suggested David, grabbing the navy blue backpack hanging on the chair. "Sometimes things hide where we least expect." As he opened the main compartment, his fingers found the notebooks organized with the meticulous care he had taught his son. Math, English, science, everything was there. But when he reached for the pencil case, something unusual caught his attention. A small, folded paper, almost hidden, among the pages of the English notebook. "I found the math one!" exclaimed Ethan, running to grab his uniform. "It was under the bed." David smiled, but his attention remained fixed on the note. Curiosity overcame discretion, and he carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was elegant, made with a blue pen, each letter formed with a precision that betrayed years of teaching practice. "Dear Ethan, I noticed you seemed sad today when you had difficulty with reading. I want you to know that everyone has their own pace, and your pace is special. You have a beautiful imagination and a generous heart. Keep trying because I believe in you. With love, Mrs. Smith." David reread the note 3 times, feeling something stir in his chest. It wasn't just the content of the message, although it was touching to see how the teacher genuinely cared for Ethan. It was the delicacy of those words, the way she had found exactly the right words to encourage a child in a difficult moment. "Dad, are you okay?" asked Ethan, appearing already dressed in his school uniform, the white polo shirt impeccably pressed and the navy blue pants fitted. "I'm fine, buddy. I just found something interesting." David folded the note and placed it in his shirt pocket. "Mrs. Smith left a message for you. How about we read it together after school?" Ethan's eyes lit up. She really did? That's cool. Mrs. Smith is really nice, Dad. Yesterday she helped me with the hard words and said I'm smart. I just need a little more time. David helped his son put on his sneakers, tying the laces with automatic gestures, while his mind returned to the note. There was something about Mrs. Smith that piqued his curiosity. In the few times they had met during parent-teacher meetings or at the school gates, he had noticed her genuine dedication to the children, the patient way she explained Ethan's progress, always focusing on the positives before mentioning the difficulties. The drive to Lincoln Elementary School in Greenpoint took about 15 minutes through the still busy streets of the early morning. David had chosen that school not only for its proximity, but for its reputation for excellence in serving children with special needs. The building, constructed in the 1980s, had recently undergone renovations that made it modern without losing its welcoming charm. "Dad, do you think one day I will be able to read as well as John?" asked Ethan during the drive, looking out the window at the historic buildings his father always pointed out and explained. "I'm sure of it, champ. Everyone has their special talents. You, for example, can visualize construction projects in a way that took me years to learn. Remember that old building we visited downtown? You were the only one who noticed that the windows weren't original." Ethan smiled, proud of the memory. "That's true, and Mrs. Smith said that's a kind of intelligence. It's special, and it has nothing to do with reading fast or slow." When they arrived at the school, the playground was already buzzing with the characteristic energy of the start of the school year. Children were running around, parents were hurriedly saying their goodbyes, and teachers were organizing the lines by class. David accompanied Ethan to the third grade line, where Mrs. Smith awaited with a warm smile. Mrs. Smith was 38 years old, although her youthful energy made her seem younger. Her brown hair was tied up in a practical bun, and she wore a modest floral dress that matched her welcoming personality. When she saw Ethan approaching, her brown eyes genuinely lit up. "Good morning, Ethan. Ready for another day of discoveries?" she asked, crouching down to be at the boy's level. "Good morning, Mrs. Smith. My dad said you left a note for me." David watched the interaction, noting how the teacher treated each child individually and affectionately. When she stood up and their eyes met, he felt a subtle, almost imperceptible connection. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. How are you?" "Good morning, Mrs. Smith. Thank you for the note. It was very special." She blushed slightly, a shy smile appearing on her lips. "Ethan is an exceptional child. Sometimes he just needs to be reminded of that." "Dad, can I go play on the playground until the bell rings?" interrupted Ethan, impatient with the adult conversation. "Sure, but don't wander too far from the line." As the boy ran toward his friends, David and Mrs. Smith shared a few seconds of silence, watching the children play. There was something comforting about that moment, a sense of normalcy that David hadn't experienced in a long time. "He's lucky to have such a present father," Mrs. Smith commented, breaking the silence. "Actually, I think we're the lucky ones. Teachers like you make all the difference in a child's life." The school bell rang, interrupting the conversation. Ethan ran back to the line, waving enthusiastically at his dad. David returned the wave and headed to the car, but not before taking one last look at Mrs. Smith, who was already organizing the children to enter. On the way to the office, located in a restored historic building on Augusta Street, David couldn't shake off that simple yet meaningful conversation. There was a sincerity in Mrs. Smith's voice, a genuine passion for education that touched him deeply. The rest of the day passed in meetings about the restoration of a 19th-century mansion in the gardens, but his mind kept returning to the folded note in his pocket. At 5 in the afternoon, when he went to pick up Ethan from school, He found his son beaming, holding a colorful drawing. "Dad, look! I read an entire paragraph without needing help. Mrs. Smith said I'm improving a lot." David smiled, feeling his heart warm with his son's achievement. "Congratulations, champ. How about we celebrate with a snack at Giuseppe's Bakery?" As they walked toward the Italian bakery they had frequented since Ethan was a baby, David realized something had changed that day. He couldn't quite explain what it was, but there was a feeling that his organized and predictable life had just gained a new dimension, filled with unexplored possibilities. The note in his pocket seemed to pulse with its own energy, reminding him that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the simplest and most sincere gestures. And for the first time in a long time, David Johnson allowed himself to imagine that perhaps it was time to open his heart to new possibilities. The following weeks brought a subtle yet noticeable change to David's routine. His visits to the school, previously limited to drop-off and pick-up times for Ethan, began to extend for a few extra minutes. A conversation here, a question about his son's progress there, always finding reasons to prolong encounters with Mrs. Smith. It was an April morning, the autumn breeze in New York announcing itself with a cool wind that rustled the leaves of the trees in Greenpoint. David arrived earlier than usual at the school, taking advantage of a cancelled work meeting. The playground was still relatively empty, with only a few children playing on the swings under the supervision of Mrs. Johnson, a 50-year-old lady who knew each student by name. "Mr. Johnson," called Ethan, running toward his dad with a paper in hand, "look what I made in art class." The drawing showed a colorful house with two figures at the door, clearly father and son, and a third figure that David couldn't immediately identify. "It's beautiful, son. Who is this person next to you?" "It's Mrs. Smith. She always stands at the door of our classroom in the morning, so I drew her too. She's part of our routine, right, Dad?" David felt a strange sensation in his stomach. "She's part of our routine," he mentally repeated, realizing how Ethan had normalized the teacher's presence in their lives. "That's true, champ. She is very special. Can I go show the drawing to her? I think she'll like it." Before David could respond, Ethan was already running toward the classroom. With little choice, the father followed him, walking through the hallways decorated with children's artwork and educational posters about the environment and diversity. Mrs. Smith was in her classroom, organizing materials for the first lesson of the day. She wore a light blue blouse that highlighted her eyes, and her hair was down, framing her face delicately. When she saw Ethan burst in like a whirlwind, followed by David, her face lit up. "Ethan, what a nice surprise! How are you today?" "Mrs. Smith, look what I made!" exclaimed the boy, proudly extending the drawing. Mrs. Smith carefully took the paper, examining every detail. David watched her expression soften as she recognized herself in the drawing. "Wow, Ethan, this is beautiful. You drew me here with you." "It's because you're part of our family of the school," Ethan explained with the typical sincerity of children. "Dad always says that special people are part of our lives, even when they don't live in our house." David felt his face heat up. "Ethan has a very unique way of seeing the world," he explained, trying to ease the situation. "And it's a beautiful way to see," Mrs. Smith replied, looking directly at David for a few seconds that seemed to stretch longer than usual. "Ethan, how about you go put your backpack away? Class is going to start in a few minutes." The boy promptly obeyed, leaving the two adults alone in the room. A comfortable silence settled, broken only by the distant sounds of children in the playground. "He is progressing very well," Mrs. Smith commented, organizing some books on the table. "Yesterday he managed to read a complete paragraph from a text about marine animals. You should have seen the pride in his eyes." "You have a special gift with children," David said, observing the walls of the classroom decorated with student work and photos of group activities. Ethan comes home telling me everything about the classes. It's Mrs. Smith said this. Mrs. Smith taught that. Mrs. Smith laughed, a musical sound that made David smile involuntarily. I hope they're good things. They're always good. Yesterday he explained to me that you taught the class about empathy using a book by Monteiro Lobato. He was fascinated by the idea that we can understand how other people feel. Oh, do you know Lobato's work? Mrs. Smith's question carried genuine interest. I do. In fact, I have a small collection of first editions. It's a passion I inherited from my grandfather. He used to say that Brazilian literature is a treasure we must preserve. Mrs. Smith's eyes lit up. That's amazing. I'm also passionate about our literature. I was just planning a project about Brazilian writers for the second semester. I wanted to do something special that connects the children with our cultural roots. What kind of project do you have in mind? Mrs. Smith became animated, gesturing as she spoke. I thought about creating a kind of literary time travel. Each month would be dedicated to a different author. Monteiro Lobato, Cecilia Meirelles, Vinicius de Moraes. The idea is to adapt some works to the reality of children with learning difficulties. David was impressed by the evident passion in her voice. It's an ambitious project and very necessary. Ethan has always struggled with long texts, but when he finds something that truly interests him... Exactly. The secret is to find the entry point for each child. Ethan, for example, is very interested in stories involving construction and architecture. The other day, I adapted a fable using the metaphor of the three little pigs building houses, and he was completely engaged. You really know your students, David observed admiringly. I try. Each child is a unique universe, and Ethan... Mrs. Smith hesitated for a moment as if she wanted to say something more personal, but held back. Ethan has a special sensitivity. He notices things that other children don't. The school bell rang, signaling the start of classes. Other students began to enter the room, greeting Mrs. Smith enthusiastically. David realized it was time to say goodbye. Well, I think it's best if I go. Thank you for the conversation. It was enlightening. Of course. And if you want to talk more about the literary project, or if you have suggestions, definitely. Maybe I can help in some way. I have some contacts in libraries and museums that could be useful. Mrs. Smith smiled. That would be wonderful. David waved goodbye to Ethan and left the school with a strange feeling. The conversation with Mrs. Smith had revealed much more than he expected. She was not just a dedicated teacher. She was a passionate educator with a deep vision of child development and a genuine love for Brazilian culture. During the commute to work, David found himself thinking about Mrs. Smith's expression when she talked about the literary project, the way her eyes sparkled when discussing education, and the tenderness with which she treated Ethan and the other children. There was something about her that stirred him in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. In the office, located in a restored mansion that he had supervised years before, David tried to focus on the restoration project of a Baroque church in Ouro Preto. But his mind kept drifting back to the morning conversation. Impulsively, he picked up the phone and dialed his sister, Marcia, who lived in Riverside. Marcia, it's me. David, what a surprise. Is everything okay? Is Ethan doing well? He is. In fact, he's doing great. The new school has been excellent for him. That's good. And you? How are you feeling? David hesitated. Marcia knew him too well to accept evasive answers. I'm different. Something strange happened today. Strange how? Good strange or bad strange? Good, I think. I had a better conversation with Ethan's teacher. She's an interesting woman, Marcia. Smart, dedicated. Oh, Marcia's voice carried a playful tone. What kind of interesting, bro? It's not like that, David protested, although he knew his sister was right. It's just that It's been a while since I've met someone with whom I can have a really good conversation. You know, about books, education, things that matter. David, you don't need to justify yourself to me. It's natural to be interested in people. You've been alone for 3 years. Ethan needs stability, but you also deserve to be happy. It's complicated, Marcia. Ethan is finally adapting well at school. I don't want to create expectations or complicate things. Or you might be complicating things on your own. Sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them. And from the sound of your voice, this teacher must be really special. After hanging up, David was thoughtful. Marcia was right. He was complicating things. But it was also true that his priority had always been Ethan. The boy had gone through enough changes in recent years. The parents' separation, the move, the diagnosis of dyslexia, the adaptation to a new school. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly between meetings and project analyses. When it was time to pick up Ethan, David found himself choosing a different shirt and combing his hair before leaving the office. "It's just education," he murmured to himself, but he knew he was lying. At the school, he found Ethan playing in the yard with 2 classmates, building something with wooden blocks. Mrs. Smith was supervising a group of children nearby, guiding an outdoor reading activity. "Dad!" shouted Ethan upon seeing him. "Look what we're building! It's a castle with a drawbridge!" David approached, impressed with the ingenuity of the construction. "It looks fantastic! You guys are natural architects!" "Mrs. Smith said we can leave it here until tomorrow to show the other classes," Ethan explained proudly. "That's great! And how was the rest of your day?" As Ethan enthusiastically recounted the activities, David noticed Mrs. Smith approaching. She had changed from her blouse into the school jacket and was carrying a folder with papers to grade. "Mr. Johnson, I'm glad you arrived. I wanted to discuss something about the project we talked about this morning." "Of course, go ahead." "I spoke with the curriculum coordinator about the literary project idea, and she was very excited. She suggested that I prepare a more detailed proposal to present at the next school board meeting." "That's wonderful. How can I help?" Mrs. Smith hesitated for a moment, as if making an important decision. "Well, you mentioned that you have knowledge about Brazilian literature and contacts in libraries. I thought maybe, if it's not too much trouble, and we could meet to discuss some ideas. Of course, if you have the time and interest." David felt his heart race slightly. "I would be happy to help. When do you think would be a good time? How about Saturday morning? I know a very quiet cafe nearby, perfect for chatting and working. If it doesn't interfere with your plans with Ethan. Actually, on Saturday mornings, Ethan goes to swimming lessons." "That would be perfect." Mrs. Smith smiled, and David noticed a slight blush on her cheeks. "Then it's settled. Villa Cafe on Harmony Street at 9 o'clock? "Perfect. And Mrs. Smith, thank you for including Ethan in the project from the beginning. It means a lot to him, and to me as well." On the way home, Ethan chatted about the block castle and how Mrs. Smith had praised his creativity. David listened attentively, but his mind was divided between the joy of his son and the anticipation of the meeting on Saturday. For the first time in a long while, David Johnson had something to look forward to that didn't just involve responsibilities, and that both excited and scared him. Trying again, continue. Chapter 3. Cafe, Literature and Deep Connections. Saturday dawned with a clear sky and pleasant temperatures typical of autumn in New York. David woke up earlier than usual, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. While preparing breakfast, he watched Ethan devour his pancakes with strawberry jam, excited about his swimming lesson. "Dad, are you going to do something fun today?" the boy asked, smearing his face with jam. "I'm meeting Mrs. Smith to discuss a school project," David replied, trying to sound casual while wiping his son's face. "That's cool. Can you tell her I loved the story about the Curupira she told yesterday? She said she's going to teach more legends." Sure, I'll mention it. After dropping Ethan off at his swimming class, David headed to Greenpoint. The Villa Cafe was located in a charming, converted brownstone with exposed brick walls and plants, creating a cozy atmosphere. It was the kind of place that attracted artists, writers and teachers, people who valued deep conversations over haste. Mrs. Smith was already there when he arrived, sitting at a table near the window that overlooked a small indoor garden. She wore a modest floral dress and had let her hair down, cascading naturally over her shoulders. She had half a cup of coffee and several books spread out on the table, along with a notebook where she had already written some notes. "You arrived just in time," she said, smiling as she saw him approach. "I just ordered a café au lait. I recommend it. It's excellent here." "Great choice of place," David commented, looking around and noticing the shelves filled with books decorating the walls. "Looks like we found the perfect environment to plan a literary project." "It's one of my favorite hideaways," Mrs. Smith confessed. "I come here on Saturdays to grade papers and prepare lessons. The atmosphere is inspiring." David ordered an espresso and a toasted bagel, feeling surprisingly at ease. "So, tell me more about your ideas for the project." Mrs. Smith opened her notebook, revealing pages filled with colorful notes and well-organized outlines. "I want to create something that connects the children with our cultural identity, but in a playful and inclusive way. I thought about dividing the school year into 5 thematic modules." 5 modules? Yes. The first would be legends and folklore, starting with Monteiro Lobato, but expanding to other regions of Brazil. The second, poetry that inspires, focusing on Cecilia Meireles and Vinicius de Moraes. The third would be adventures and discoveries, featuring contemporary authors who write for children. David was impressed with the depth of the planning. And the other 2? Stories from home would be the fourth, exploring narratives about family and traditions. And the last, dreams and future, where the children themselves would create their stories based on what they've learned. "It's an ambitious and very well-structured project," David said, genuinely admiring. "How do you plan to adapt it for children with learning difficulties?" Mrs. Smith became animated, gesturing as she explained. "Each module will have 3 levels of adaptation. For children like Ethan, who have dyslexia, we'll use visual resources, audiobooks and hands-on activities. The idea is that no one feels excluded. He would be fascinated by this. He loves it when he can visualize the stories." "Exactly. For example, for The Legend of Bigfoot, I thought about creating a dramatization where the kids could build the forest set using recyclable materials. Ethan, with his talent for spatial visualization, would be perfect to lead the construction part." David felt a wave of gratitude for how Mrs. Smith saw his son. "You really understand children. It's rare to find educators who see potential where others only see limitations." "I learned this from my brother," said Mrs. Smith, her voice becoming softer and more personal. "He has Down syndrome, and growing up with him taught me that intelligence comes in many forms. Different people see the world in unique ways, and that's a gift, not a problem." David was touched by the revelation. "How old is he?" 25. He works at a bakery in the neighborhood and is the happiest person I know. He taught me that success isn't measured by traditional standards, but by the ability to be happy and make others happy. That's a valuable lesson, and it explains a lot about your approach with the kids." Mrs. Smith smiled, taking a sip of her coffee. "And you? How did you learn to have so much patience with Ethan? Not all parents can handle their children's learning difficulties so well." David thought about the question, absent-mindedly stirring the sugar. "I think it was a learning process. When we discovered Ethan's dyslexia, I felt lost. I was afraid I wouldn't be a good father, that I wouldn't be able to help him in the way he needed. And what changed? I realized I was focusing on what he couldn't do, instead of celebrating what he did well. Ethan has a unique way of understanding the world. He sees connections that I don't see, has a natural empathy for people and situations. Dyslexia is just a detail in the incredible personality he has. Mrs. Smith watched him with admiration. Ethan is lucky to have a father who thinks like that. Many children don't have that support at home. Actually, I think I'm the lucky one. He teaches me something new every day. The conversation flowed naturally in the following minutes, alternating between the educational project and more personal aspects of their lives. David discovered that Mrs. Smith lived alone in a small apartment near the school, enjoyed cooking on weekends, and had an impressive collection of children's literature. "Can I ask a personal question?" Mrs. Smith said, hesitating slightly. "Of course." "Ethan has mentioned that you raise him alone. It must be challenging to balance work, fatherhood, and still have time for projects like historical restoration." David sighed. "It is challenging, yes, but it's also rewarding. After the divorce, I had to learn to be both a father and a mother at the same time. It's not always easy, but Ethan is worth every difficulty." "And you? Do you have time for yourself? For your own dreams and interests?" The question caught David off guard. It had been so long since anyone asked about his own desires that he took a moment to respond. "Honestly, I haven't thought about that in a long time. My life revolves around Ethan and work, but recently I've been feeling that maybe it's time to think a little more about other possibilities, about meaningful connections, about projects that go beyond the professional." Mrs. Smith blushed slightly, lowering her gaze to her notebook. "It's important to have balance. Being a good father doesn't mean giving up who you are as a person. And you? Do you achieve that balance?" "I'm learning. For a long time, I dedicated myself entirely to work and education, but sometimes I miss deeper connections, conversations like this one, for example." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with unspoken understandings that neither was ready to verbalize. David watched Mrs. Smith organizing her notes and felt something stir in his chest, a sensation he had forgotten existed. "Well, how about we get back to the project?" Mrs. Smith suggested, breaking the moment. "You mentioned you have contacts at libraries. What kind of partnerships could we establish?" David composed himself, grateful for the change of subject. "I know the coordinator at the Mario de Andrade Library. They have an amazing collection of first editions by American authors and offer educational programs. I also have contacts at the Museum of American History, which could complement the historical cultural aspect." "That would be fantastic. Imagine taking the kids to see the original books by the authors they are studying. I can talk to them on Monday and see what kind of program we could develop in partnership," Mrs. Smith quickly wrote in her notebook. "How about we create a timeline? If we can get the project approved at the council meeting next week, we could start implementing it as early as May." They spent the next hour detailing each module of the project, creating calendars, listing necessary resources, and imagining specific activities. David was impressed with Mrs. Smith's creativity and her ability to turn abstract ideas into concrete and viable plans. "You know," he said as she organized the papers, "it's been a long time since I felt so excited about a project. There's something special about what we're creating." "I feel it too. It's as if we're building something bigger than just an educational program." "As if we're building a bridge," David added, "between the kids and our culture, but also between us and possibilities we haven't yet named." Mrs. Smith looked him directly in the eyes. "Exactly." When they finally left the cafe, the sun was already high and the Streets of Greenpoint buzzed with the typical energy of Saturdays. David walked with Mrs. Smith to her car, a discussion about American literature still echoing between them. "Thank you for the morning," she said, standing next to the car. "It was enlightening. For me, too. And Mrs. Smith, I'm looking forward to seeing how this project develops, both at school and in other aspects." She smiled, a special sparkle in her eyes. "Me too." On the way to pick up Ethan from swimming, David Johnson was smiling involuntarily. For the first time in years, he felt that his life was about to gain a new dimension, one that promised to be as challenging as it was rewarding. Deep in his chest, a long-forgotten feeling began to awaken, whispering possibilities that he still didn't have the courage to admit, but could no longer completely ignore. The following 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activities and planning. David found himself immersed in the educational project with an energy he hadn't experienced in years. During work breaks, he exchanged messages with Mrs. Smith about program details, partnership suggestions, and activity ideas. What had started as a professional collaboration was turning into something deeper and more complex. On Wednesday afternoon, David left the office early for a meeting at the Central Library in downtown. Dr. Charles Anderson, the coordinator of educational programs at the library, was a 60-year-old man with grey hair and a contagious passion for American literature. "David," Dr. Anderson greeted him, extending his hand warmly. "What a pleasure to see you. How is the restoration project for St. Mary's Church going?" "It's going very well, Doctor, but today I came to talk about another project, equally important." Seated in the library's meeting room with a view of Anhangabau Valley, David explained in detail Mrs. Smith's literary project. Dr. Anderson listened with increasing attention, taking notes and occasionally interrupting to ask specific questions. "It's an ambitious and much-needed project," the librarian commented when David finished explaining, "especially the inclusion part for children with learning difficulties. We have very few programs in this area." Mrs. Smith has a very special vision of inclusive education. She believes that every child has a unique way of connecting with knowledge. "And you? How did you get involved in this project?" "As far as I remember, you have always been more focused on historical heritage and architecture." David hesitated for a moment. "My son Ethan studies with Mrs. Smith. She has been doing an extraordinary job with him, and when I heard about the project, well, I wanted to help." Dr. Anderson smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "I understand, and it seems that this teacher is really special to spark such enthusiasm in a busy engineer like you." "She is dedicated and passionate about what she does," David replied, feeling his face warm slightly. "Great, then let's get to the practical details. We can offer guided tours tailored to each module of the project. We have a fantastic collection of first editions, including some original manuscripts by Mark Twain." The meeting extended for 2 hours, with Dr. Anderson becoming increasingly enthusiastic. They planned a series of interactive activities, storytelling in the library's event hall, creative writing workshops, and even a temporary exhibition of the children's work. "David," Dr. Anderson said at the end of the meeting, "I want to meet this Mrs. Smith in person. How about we organize a meeting here at the library? I can show her our collection and discuss the details of the partnership." "I'm sure she would be delighted. When would be convenient?" "How about Friday afternoon? That way we can wrap up the meeting with a small snack at the library cafe, a more informal setting suitable for planning our next steps." On the way back to Greenpoint, David called Mrs. Smith. "Mrs. Smith, it's me, David. I have great news about our project." "That's wonderful. Tell me everything." As he drove through the busy streets downtown, David enthusiastically relayed the details of the meeting. Mrs. Smith occasionally interrupted him with exclamations of joy and specific questions. "I can't believe they have original manuscripts. By Twain. The children are going to be amazed," she exclaimed, "and Dr. Anderson wants to meet you in person. He suggested Friday afternoon at the library. Are you available?" "Of course. I can leave school early. David, I don't know how to thank you for all your efforts." "You don't need to thank me. I'm doing this because I believe in the project. And because—" "Because?" David hesitated, the words caught in his throat. "Because it's important for Ethan, and for other children like him." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Of course. For the children." Thursday passed quickly, with David torn between his professional responsibilities and the anxiety for the meeting on Friday. When he picked up Ethan from school, he found the boy particularly excited. "Dad! Mrs. Smith told the class about the book project. We're going to see a giant library and see really old books." "That's right, champ. And you're going to have a special role in the project." "What role?" "You're going to help build the settings for the legends. Mrs. Smith said you have a special talent for imagining how things fit in space." Ethan bounced with joy. "That's cool. Can I make a real Bigfoot?" "Of course you can, and many other things too." That night, after putting Ethan to bed, David found himself flipping through his own collection of American literature. He stopped at a volume of short stories by Edgar Allan Poe and reread The Telltale Heart, thinking about how writers managed to capture the complex intricacies of human emotions. There was something ironic about reading about fate and coincidences right now, when his own life seemed to be taking unexpected turns. A simple note in his son's backpack had triggered a series of events that were changing his perspective on many things. Friday arrived with a cloudy sky and a light drizzle typical of autumn in New York. David arrived at the library 15 minutes early, finding Dr. Anderson organizing some old books on a table in the meeting room. "I came early to prepare some surprises for our guest," the librarian explained, smiling. "I set aside some special items from our collection." Mrs. Smith arrived promptly at 3 in the afternoon, wearing a navy blue blazer over a white blouse, her hair neatly tied in an elegant bun. She carried a leather portfolio and a notebook, clearly prepared for an important professional meeting. "Dr. Anderson, I present to you Mrs. Smith, the creator of the project," David said, feeling a strange pride as he made the introduction. "Mrs. Smith, it's a great pleasure to meet you," Dr. Anderson greeted her, kissing her hand. David extended his hand in a gentlemanly manner. "Ethan told me wonderful things about your work." "The pleasure is mine, Dr. Anderson. This library is a dream for any educator." The meeting began formally, with Dr. Anderson presenting the library's history and its educational programs. But gradually, the conversation became warmer and more personal, especially when he brought out the special items he had set aside. "Look at this," he said, carefully opening a box. "First edition of The Saatchi from 1921. And here we have some original letters that Mark Twain wrote to young readers." Mrs. Smith delicately held one of the letters, her eyes shining with emotion. "It's unbelievable. I can feel the history in these pages." David observed her reaction, touched by the genuine passion she displayed. Imagine the impact this will have on the children, seeing that the authors they study were real people who wrote letters just like them. "Exactly," Dr. Anderson agreed. "And here is my special surprise for you." He opened another case, revealing a time-worn manuscript, an unpublished fable by Mark Twain, recently found in his personal archives. It has never been published. Mrs. Smith was speechless, her hands trembling with emotion. Can I touch it?" "Of course. But I'll let you in on a secret. We are preparing a special edition of this fable for the author's centenary, and I would like the first audience to hear it to be the children from your project." Dr. Anderson, this is an invaluable gift, exclaimed Mrs. Smith, tears of joy in her eyes. David felt his heart warm seeing her emotion. Impulsively, he placed his hand on Mrs. Smith's shoulder. You deserve this. The project deserves this. She looked at him, and for a moment the electricity between them was almost palpable. Dr. Anderson, perceptive as he was, smiled discreetly. Well, how about we celebrate at the library cafe? We have a lot to plan. The cafe at the Central Library occupied a charming space on the ground floor, overlooking the inner garden, dark wooden tables, shelves with books for sale, and an atmosphere that invited contemplation and dialogue. Mrs. Smith, Dr. Anderson said as they savoured their coffees, may I ask you a personal question? What motivated you to dedicate yourself to special education? Mrs. Smith smiled, absent-mindedly stirring sugar into her coffee. My younger brother, Ethan, he has Down syndrome, and growing up with him taught me that intelligence doesn't come in just one form. He showed me that every person has their own gifts, their own way of understanding and interacting with the world. What a valuable lesson, Dr. Anderson commented. And you, David? How does your son Ethan relate to learning? Ethan has dyslexia, but that has never stopped him from being a bright and creative child. Mrs. Smith was the first educator who truly understood that, who saw his potential instead of focusing on his difficulties. Mrs. Smith blushed slightly. Ethan is special. He has a unique way of seeing the world, a sensitivity that few children possess. Dr. Anderson observed the interaction between the two with growing interest. It's wonderful when we find people who see beyond appearances, isn't it? Both in children and in adults. The statement carried a subtext that did not go unnoticed by either David or Mrs. Smith. They both lowered their gaze, aware that there was something unspoken hanging in the air. Well, Dr. Anderson continued, smoothly changing the subject, shall we finalize the practical details? Can I schedule the children's first visit for the 3rd week of May? They spent the next hour organizing schedules, defining logistics, and planning every detail of the visits. When they finally said goodbye, the sun was already setting, painting the sky of New York with orange hues. Mrs. Smith, David said as they walked together to the parking lot, thank you for letting me be a part of this. Today was inspiring. Thank you for making all of this possible. On my own, I could never have created something so grand. They stopped beside Mrs. Smith's car, a moment of hesitation lingering between them. David wanted to say something more, to express the feelings that were growing in his chest, but the words felt inadequate. David? Mrs. Smith said softly. Yes? Do you think that we are just colleagues working on a project? The question caught David off guard. He looked into her eyes, seeing the same uncertainty and hope that he felt in his own heart. Honestly, I can no longer define exactly what we are, but I know that these meetings, these conversations, are the most important moments of my week. Mrs. Smith smiled, a special glow illuminating her face. For me too. They said goodbye with a handshake that lasted a few seconds longer than necessary, charged with unspoken promises and possibilities beginning to unfold on the horizon of their lives. On the way home, David found himself smiling involuntarily, a sense of lightness that he hadn't experienced in a long time filling his chest. 4. The first time since the divorce, he allowed himself to imagine that perhaps it was time to open his heart to new possibilities, possibilities that had a name, a surname, and a smile that was becoming essential to his happiness. Continue Chapter 5. The bakery of encounters and unexpected revelations May arrived, bringing the first chills of autumn in New York and a routine that had naturally established itself between David and Mrs. Smith. The meetings about the educational project became weekly gatherings, always in different cafes in Greenpoint, as if they were exploring the cozy corners of the neighborhood together. It was a sunny Monday when David decided to leave the office early to pick up some documents at the school before getting Ethan. He parked the car on Harmony Street and walked through the tree-lined streets, observing how the neighborhood came to life in the late afternoon. Street performers entertained at the corners, cafes prepared for the evening rush, and a bohemian and welcoming atmosphere lingered in the air. As he passed in front of Bella Vista Bakery, a small Italian pastry shop with a green facade and golden signs that he had known for years, David stopped abruptly. Through the bakery window, David saw a scene that made him smile involuntarily. Mrs. Smith was sitting at one of the small tables in the back, chatting animatedly with an elderly man in a white apron, clearly the baker, while savoring what appeared to be a latte and a pastry. Without thinking much, David entered the bakery. The familiar aroma of fresh bread and espresso enveloped him immediately, bringing back memories of rushed mornings when Ethan was younger and they would stop there for breakfast before school. "Good morning, Mr. David," enthusiastically greeted Joe Bennett, the 70-year-old Italian owner who had run the bakery for 3 decades. "How is little Ethan?" "Good morning, Joe. Ethan is great, thank you. And how is your family?" Joe smiled, wiping his hands on his apron. "All good, thanks. My granddaughter just graduated in education, you know. She's going to work with special needs children, like that teacher over there," he said, discreetly pointing to Mrs. Smith. David followed Joe's gaze and met Mrs. Smith's eyes, which were watching him with a look of surprise and joy. She waved, a spontaneous smile lighting up her face. "Mrs. Smith," Joe said, addressing her, "Look, Mr. David, Ethan's father, do you two know each other?" "We do, Joe," Mrs. Smith replied, rising from the table. He's a partner in a project at school." "What a small coincidence," exclaimed Joe, clapping his hands. "You two are my favorite customers. Always come here alone, always at the same times. Monday and Thursday mornings for you, Mr. David. Tuesday and Friday afternoons for Mrs. Smith. I always thought, what a pity they never meet." David and Mrs. Smith exchanged glances, surprised by the revelation. "How long have you been coming to this bakery?" David asked. "About 2 years," Mrs. Smith replied. "I discovered this place by chance and fell in love with the atmosphere. And you?" "Since Ethan was little. About 4 years, maybe. How have we never crossed paths before?" Joe laughed, serving an espresso to David without him asking. "Fate, my friends. Fate wanted you to meet at school first. Now that you know each other, you can discover that you have a lot in common." "What an incredible coincidence," murmured Mrs. Smith, still processing the information. "Coincidence?" Joe shook his head theatrically. "No coincidence. My grandmother always said, when 2 good people meet so many times without seeing each other, it's because the universe is preparing something special." David felt his face warm, but he couldn't help smiling. "Joe, you are an incorrigible romantic. And why not? Life is too short not to believe in love, Mr. David. Just look at you two. He's a devoted father. She's a wonderful teacher, both like lattes and pastries." "Perfect." Mrs. Smith laughed, a musical sound that made David feel even more at ease. "Joe, I think you're fantasizing too much." "Fantasizing? No fantasy. Do you want to know something? Every time Mrs. Smith comes here on Tuesdays, she asks if that gentleman who comes with the boy has been by, and you, Mr. David, always look at the table where she usually sits." Both were visibly embarrassed, but Joe continued, relentless in his observation. "And you know what else? You always order the same things, latte with a plain pastry, never the more expensive sweets. Practical people who know how to appreciate the simple things in life." "Joe," David interrupted, laughing, "I think you're making a very deep analysis of our eating habits." It's not an analysis, it's an observation. I've worked with people for 50 years. I know when two souls complete each other. At that moment, Joe's daughter, a 40-year-old woman named Lisa, came out of the kitchen carrying a tray of bread. "Dad, stop bothering the customers with your crazy theories about fate," she said, smiling affectionately at David and Mrs. Smith. "Crazy? Lisa, you don't understand anything about romance. Just look at these two. Perfect for each other." Mrs. Smith and David exchanged glances again, a mix of amusement and embarrassment on their faces. "How about we sit down?" suggested Mrs. Smith, "since Joe caught us, frequenting the same place for years without knowing each other." "Great idea," agreed David, pulling a chair for her. Joe approached, beaming. "Here we go. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to prepare my special cheesecake for you. It's my grandmother's recipe. I only make it for very special occasions." "We don't need special treatment, Joe," protested Mrs. Smith. "Oh, but of course you do. Two of my favorite customers finally meeting in my bakery. This is very special." As Joe walked away, murmuring in Italian and gesturing animatedly, David and Mrs. Smith were left alone. At the table, a comfortable silence settling between them. "So," David said, "we've been coming to the same place for years, and we've never seen each other. It's almost surreal." "Joe has an interesting theory about fate," Mrs. Smith laughed. "He's delightful and clearly an incorrigible romantic. I bet he sees special connections between all his regular customers." "Probably, but I must admit there's something intriguing about this coincidence. How many times have we passed by here, on the same streets, maybe even crossed paths without realizing? It's as if our lives were already connected in some way, even before we met." Joe returned with 2 generous portions of cheesecake and 2 fresh lattes, serving everything with exaggerated ceremony. "Here's my grandmother's cheesecake. And now tell me, how did you really meet?" "At school," explained Mrs. Smith. "David is Ethan's father, one of my students." "Ah, little Ethan. What a lovely boy. Always polite, always smiling, just like his dad." David smiled. "Ethan loves coming here. He always asks to stop by the bakery after school." "He's a special boy," said Joe, casually sitting in the chair next to them. "Lisa always comments on how kind he is to everyone. And smart, too. The other day he explained to me how old ovens worked, said his dad taught him about architecture." "Ethan has a natural curiosity about buildings and history," David explained proudly. "He likes to understand how the adaptações, Giuseppe, Joe, Payne, Bread, Miguel, Ethan, Curupira, Bigfoot, Festa Junina, School Fair, Traje de Caipira, Traditional Costume, Tia Helena, Aunt Sarah, Campion, Champ, Café, Coffee, Things Work Out. Just like Dad, you two look so much alike. And Mrs. Smith, always so patient with all the kids she brings here for. Special projects." Mrs. Smith was surprised. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you didn't know she brings kids here sometimes?" Joe addressed David. "Once a month she brings a small group to teach them about Italian traditions, about how to make bread. It's beautiful." David looked at Mrs. Smith with renewed admiration. "You never mentioned that." "I didn't think it was important. I use the bakery as part of the lessons on cultural diversity. Joe is very generous in sharing his stories and traditions." "Important? It's very important," Joe exclaimed. "She teaches the kids about respect, about traditions, about how different cultures blend in America. Ethan should participate." "Actually," Mrs. Smith said hesitantly, "I was thinking of inviting Ethan to the next group. I thought it would be interesting for him to learn more about the traditions of the neighborhood where he lives." "That would be fantastic," David said. "Ethan would be fascinated." Joe clapped his hands, beaming. "Perfect! And you two can come together. A lovely family." "Joe?" Mrs. Smith began, embarrassed. "What? It's true. You complement each other. He practical and organized, she creative and caring. The boy adores both of you. What more do you need?" Lisa appeared. Again, this time to rescue the customers from her father's enthusiasm. "Dad, let them talk in peace. Go back to the kitchen. There's bread to bake." After Joe left, still murmuring about destiny and soulmates, David and Mrs. Smith were alone again. "He is intense," Mrs. Smith commented, laughing. "But he has a good heart. And I have to admit that some of his observations are insightful." "What do you mean?" David hesitated, absently stirring his cheesecake. "Well, it's true that I always look at the table where you're sitting now, and it's also true that these meetings have become the most important part of my week." Mrs. Smith stopped eating, looking directly at him. "David, Mrs. Smith, can I be direct about something that's been bothering me?" "Of course. We've been working together for weeks on this amazing project, spending hours talking about literature, education, our kids, and I feel like there's something more happening here, something neither of us is openly discussing." Mrs. Smith lowered her gaze, her cheeks slightly flushed. "You're right. There is something more. What exactly?" "I can't name it yet. I just know that when I wake up in the morning, one of the first things I think about is whether I'll see you today, and when I go to sleep, I relive our conversations, thinking about things I wish I had said." David felt his heart race. "Mrs. Smith, and you? Do you feel something similar?" "I do. And it scares me a little because it's been a long time since I've allowed someone to become so important in my life. But at the same time, it's the most natural thing in the world," she finished. They looked at each other in silence, a mutual understanding passing between them. Joe, discreetly observing from the kitchen, smiled contentedly as if his theory about destiny was being confirmed before his eyes. "So," David finally said, "what do we do with this discovery?" "I don't know. I just know I don't want it to end." "Neither do I." The sound of a cell phone ringing broke the moment. It was David's phone, Ethan calling from school. "Dad, where are you? I'm waiting here at the gate." David looked at the clock, surprised. "Wow, I didn't even notice the time. It's already 5:30. "Go pick up Ethan," Mrs. Smith said, smiling. "I'll stay here finishing my latte." "Mrs. Smith, can we continue this conversation?" "We can, and we should." David stood up, left money on the table and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "For the record, Joe may be dramatic, but he's not entirely wrong about destinies and special encounters." Mrs. Smith smiled, a special sparkle in her eyes. "I think you're right." As David hurried out to pick up Ethan, Joe approached Mrs. Smith, bringing a fresh espresso. "So, teacher, how about my cheesecake?" "Delicious, Joe, as always." "And what about Mr. David? What do you think of him?" Mrs. Smith laughed, knowing that Joe wouldn't give up easily. "I think you were right about one thing." "What thing?" "Some coincidences are destiny in disguise." Joe smiled, satisfied, murmuring something in Italian about young love and hearts finally meeting, and Mrs. Smith, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to believe that maybe it was true. June arrived, bringing the characteristic chill of the winter season and the excitement of the traditional school fair. Mrs. Smith had dedicated herself intensely to organizing the event, turning it into a unique opportunity to showcase the literary project she had developed with David. The schoolyard was decorated with colorful banners, stalls of typical foods, and an improvised stage where the children would present dramatizations of the legends studied during the semester. On the Saturday morning of the fair, David woke up with a strange feeling of anxiety and anticipation. It had been weeks since he had a deeper conversation with Mrs. Smith. Both seemed to be avoiding the delicate subject they had touched on at Joe's bakery. The meetings continued, but now they carried an underlying tension, as if both were aware of something, unresolved, hanging between them. "Dad, are you nervous?" Ethan asked as they had breakfast. The boy was wearing a traditional costume that Mrs. Smith had helped him make, a plaid shirt, a straw hat, and pants with colourful patches. "Why do you ask that, champ?" "Because you've stirred the sugar in your coffee about 10 times and still haven't taken a sip." David laughed, realizing he was indeed distracted. "I'm excited to see your performance. You and the class have practiced so much. Aunt Sarah said our Bigfoot play is going to be the coolest of all. I'm going to be the boy who gets lost in the forest and learns to respect nature. I'm sure it will be fantastic." During the drive to school, Ethan chatted about the details of the performance, but David could hardly concentrate. His adaptosois, Helena, Mrs. Smith, Ken Tome, hot cider, Lucas. David's mind constantly drifted back to Mrs. Smith and the unfinished conversation they had. There was something growing between them, something that transcended professional partnership and friendship, but neither seemed to have the courage to name it clearly. The school was transformed when they arrived. The yard was buzzing, with entire families, parents photographing their children in costumes, teachers organizing the last activities, and the irresistible smell of popcorn, hot cider, and pastries in the air. David searched for Mrs. Smith with his eyes, finding her near the stage, supervising the setup of the forest backdrop that the children had built. She wore a modest summer dress, made of blue fabric with small white flowers, and had her hair styled in 2 braids that gave her a youthful and affectionate look. When their eyes met, she waved, a radiant smile lighting up her face. "David, I'm so glad you made it," she approached, kissing Ethan's cheek affectionately. "Are you ready for the big presentation, champ?" "I am, Aunt Sarah. I memorized all my lines." "Great. Go join the other students. Your presentation will be the 3rd. As Ethan ran to join his classmates, Mrs. Smith and David shared a few seconds of silence, watching the activity around them. "Everything looks beautiful," David commented. "You managed to turn an educational project into a true cultural celebration." "Thank you, but I couldn't have done it alone. Your suggestions on the set design and your help with contacts were crucial." "Mrs. Smith." "Yes?" David hesitated, the words caught in his throat. There was something he wanted to say since their meeting at the bakery, but the atmosphere filled with families and children didn't seem appropriate. "Can I talk to you after the presentations? In private?" Mrs. Smith looked at him with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. "Of course. Is something wrong?" "It's not that something is wrong, exactly. It's just that we need to finish our conversation." Before Mrs. Smith could respond, the educational coordinator approached, greeting David enthusiastically. "Mr. Johnson, what a pleasure to have you here," Mrs. Smith told me all about your collaboration with our literary project. It's wonderful when the family gets so actively involved in education. "The pleasure is mine. Mrs. Smith created something truly special." "Yes, and the children are so engaged. Ethan, in particular, has blossomed this semester. His self-esteem has increased significantly." David looked at Mrs. Smith, gratitude evident in his eyes. Mrs. Smith has a special talent for seeing the unique potential in every child. The coordinator smiled, observing the interaction between them with interest. "It's clear that you make a great team. Perhaps we should consider expanding this collaboration to other projects." An accordion began to play, signaling the start of the presentations. The first class took the stage, presenting an adaptation of the legend of the Pink River Dolphin, followed by a charming performance about the Saci Pererê. When it was Ethan's class's turn, David felt a mix of pride and nervousness. The children took the stage wearing the costumes they had created, and the Amazon rainforest backdrop they had built during the semester looked truly impressive. Ethan appeared in the center of the stage, portraying a boy lost in the forest. His voice, initially shaky, gained confidence as the story unfolded. When Bigfoot appeared, played by his classmate Lisa, with the famous backward-facing feet, the interaction between the two was touching and fun. "Boy, why are you destroying my forest?" Lisa asked theatrically. "I didn't know I was doing harm, Lord of the Forest," Ethan replied, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "I thought plants didn't feel anything." "All living things feel, boy. The forest is a big family, and every tree, every animal, has its important role." David watched, fascinated. This was not just a school presentation. It was a profound lesson about respect for the environment and empathy, delivered in a playful and engaging way. At the end of the presentation, the audience applauded enthusiastically. Ethan searched for his father with his eyes beaming when he saw David standing, clapping vigorously. "They were fantastic!" exclaimed Mrs. Smith, also applauding. "The children exceeded all expectations." During the intermission between presentations, entire families spread out among the food stalls. David bought hot cider for himself and Mrs. Smith, and they stepped away from the crowd, finding a quieter corner near the school garden. "Ethan was wonderful," said Mrs. Smith, warming her hands around the cup of hot cider. "Did you see how naturally he expressed himself? Just a few months ago he could barely read a paragraph aloud. It's incredible the transformation you've brought about in him. And not just in reading, his self-confidence, his self-esteem." "David, can I be honest about something?" "Always." Mrs. Smith took a deep breath, as if making an important decision. "Ethan wasn't the only one who transformed over these months." David felt his heart race. "What do you mean?" "I mean that working with you, getting to know you better, seeing how dedicated you are to Ethan, how passionate you are about meaningful projects, it has changed something. In me too." "Mrs. Smith, let me finish, please. 3 years ago, when I separated from Jake's father, I swore to myself that I would focus solely on work and education, that I wouldn't allow anything else to complicate my life." David was surprised. "You were married. You have a son." Mrs. Smith nodded, slightly blushing. "Jake is 16. I've lived with him since I separated. It was a very difficult time, and for a long time I thought it was best to keep my personal and professional life completely separate." "Why didn't you ever mention this?" Because with you for the first time in years, I felt that it might be possible to have both. A career that I am passionate about, and a personal connection that completes me." David fell silent, processing the revelation. Mrs. Smith continued, her voice lower and more vulnerable. "David, I need you to know. What I'm feeling for you has nothing to do with convenience or practicality. It's something deeper. It's about admiration, compatibility, and, if I'm honest, it's about falling in love with someone for the first time in many years." David's heart finally verbalized. The feeling that both had been avoiding naming burst forth. "Sarah, and if you don't feel the same, that's okay. We can continue being colleagues, working together on the project." "Sarah, stop." David gently placed his hand on her arm. "Of course I feel the same. I've been in love with you for weeks, maybe since that first conversation in the cafe." Her eyes lit up. "Really? Really? And it terrifies me and excites me at the same time. Why does it terrify you?" David sighed, looking toward the stage where Ethan was now playing with his friends. "Because Ethan has already gone through so many changes. Because I don't want to create expectations I can't meet. Because when you become a parent, every decision affects not just you, but a child who depends entirely on your choices. I understand that, and I admire you for thinking that way. But David, yes, don't you think Ethan deserves to see his dad happy too?" that he could benefit from having more people who love him in his life. The question caught David off guard. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything specific. I'm just saying that maybe we can figure out together how to balance our feelings with our responsibilities. David looked into her eyes, seeing a sincerity and courage that touched him deeply. Sarah, can I confess something? Of course. In the past few weeks, I've started to imagine what it would be like to introduce you to Ethan not as his teacher, but as someone special in my life. And the idea doesn't scare me. In fact, it gives me hope. Sarah smiled, tears of joy shining in her eyes. Really? Really? Because you are already special to him, and for me, you have become essential. They naturally moved closer, and for a moment, it seemed they were finally going to kiss, but they were interrupted by Ethan's enthusiastic voice. Dad! Aunt Sarah! Come see! João made a little figure that stands up by itself. David and Sarah pulled away, smiling at the embarrassment of almost being caught in an intimate moment. We're coming, champ, David replied. Before they headed toward where Ethan was calling them, Sarah lightly touched David's arm. David? Yes? I'm happy that we finally talked about this. Me too. And Sarah? Yes? I would really like to meet Lucas, and for him to meet Ethan. I think they would get along well. The smile Sarah gave him was so radiant that David felt, for the first time in years, truly hopeful about the future. Perhaps it was indeed possible to balance love and responsibility. Perhaps it was time to allow his life to gain new dimensions, colors, and possibilities. As they walked together toward the group of children, both knew they had crossed an important line. They were no longer just colleagues or friends. They were two adults, aware of their responsibilities, but finally willing to explore the love that had blossomed between them as naturally as it was inevitable. And for the first time, the future seemed full of wonderful possibilities. The first week of July brought school vacation and a significant change in the routine established between David and Sarah. Without the regular meetings about the educational project, they found themselves facing the need to redefine the nature of their encounters. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Sarah called David, her voice carrying a mix of nervousness and hope. David, I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. I was just thinking about you, he replied, interrupting his analysis of architectural plans in his office. Good to know I'm not the only one, she laughed softly. Actually, I'm calling to extend a somewhat unusual invitation. What kind of invitation? Well, Lucas is having trouble with a physics project for the technical school he attends. It's about structures and material resistance, and I thought maybe you could be interested in helping him. David was surprised and touched by the invitation. Since the conversation at the festival, when Sarah revealed she had a teenage son, he had wondered when it would be appropriate to meet him. It would be a pleasure to help. What kind of trouble is he facing? He needs to design a bridge using simple materials, calculating weight support and load distribution. To me, it's all Greek. Popsicle stick bridge. Exactly. How did you guess? It's a classic engineering project. Ethan and I have done a few. When would you like me to come over? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Actually, I was wondering if you and Ethan would like to come over for dinner on Saturday. That way Lucas and Ethan could meet too, and you could give him some tips on the project. David felt his heart race. It was the first invitation for something resembling a family gathering. Sarah, are you sure Lucas will be comfortable with this? I talked to him. He's curious to meet the engineer who's helping his mom with school projects. And he also wants to meet Ethan. And Ethan, how about you ask him? That night, during dinner, David approached the subject carefully. Champ, how about we visit Mrs. Smith's house on Saturday? She has a teenage son who needs help with an engineering project. Ethan stopped eating, looking at his dad with interest. Aunt Sarah has a son. Cool. How old is he? 16 years old. His name is Lucas. Wow, that's much older than me. Do you think he will want to play with me? I'm not sure if it's about playing, son, but I'm sure you two will get along. And you can help with the bridge project too. Ethan got excited. Can I bring my Lego collection? Maybe it will give ideas for the bridge. David smiled, touched by his son's natural generosity. Of course you can. Saturday arrived with a clear sky and a mild winter temperature. Sarah lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in an old building in Brooklyn, 15 minutes from Greenpoint. The building, constructed in the 1970s, had that charm of New York buildings with a small doorman. Ethan and David stepped into the well-kept garden. "Dad, I'm nervous," Ethan confessed as they rode the elevator. "Why, champ? What if Lucas doesn't like me? What if he thinks I'm too small?" David crouched down to be at eye level with his son. "Ethan, you're a special person. Just be yourself, and I'm sure Lucas will see that." Sarah opened the door, wearing a casual navy blue dress and an apron with children's book prints. Her apartment reflected her personality, shelves filled with educational books and literature, plants in various corners, and framed student work on the walls. "Welcome to our home," she said, kissing Ethan's cheek affectionately. "Lucas is in his room finishing up some calculations. Lucas, they're here." A tall, slender teenager appeared in the hallway, wearing a rock band t-shirt and faded jeans. Lucas had the same expressive eyes as his mother, but his hair was darker, and he had a slightly skeptical posture typical of his age. "Lucas, this is David, who will help us with your project," Sarah introduced. "And this is Ethan." "Hi," Lucas greeted, extending his hand to David politely but reservedly. "My mom said you know about bridges." "I do, and I brought a specialized assistant," David said, pulling Ethan forward. "Ethan has already built several bridges with me." Lucas looked at Ethan with curiosity. "Really? What kind of bridges?" Encouraged by the question, Ethan began to speak enthusiastically. "Bridges made of sticks, Lego, even a working suspension bridge. My dad taught me about weight distribution and tension." "Cool," Lucas said, his expression softening slightly. "Want to see my project? I'm stuck on a part of the calculations." For the next 20 minutes, David watched fascinated as Ethan and Lucas interacted. The initially reserved teenager began to warm up as Ethan demonstrated surprising knowledge about construction. Sarah, watching from the kitchen while preparing dinner, smiled as she saw the three connect naturally. "Look," Ethan said, examining Lucas's project. "If you place the sticks like this, forming triangles, the bridge will be much stronger." "How do you know that?" Lucas asked, impressed. "My dad taught me. Triangles are the strongest shapes in nature." David stepped closer, analyzing the project. "Ethan is right, Lucas. Look here, your idea of using simple beams is good, but if we create a truss structure with triangles, I can draw it for you," Ethan offered, grabbing paper and pencils. As Ethan drew, concentrating with his tongue out, Lucas watched in admiration. "Dude, you draw really well for your age." "Thanks. My dad says I have a talent for visualizing things in space." Sarah approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "How's it going over here?" "Mom, Ethan is really smart," Lucas exclaimed. "He actually knows about engineering." "Of course he does," Sarah replied, affectionately ruffling Ethan's hair. "He has a special talent." David observed how naturally Sarah treated Ethan and how the boy responded positively to her attention. There was something comforting about that domestic scene. "Lucas," David said, "how about we build a prototype now? That way you can test your ideas before making the final version." "Can I help?" Ethan asked. "Of course. You can be our triangle specialist." During the construction of the prototype, Lucas began to tell Ethan about the technical school he attended, his dreams of becoming an aerospace engineer, and how difficult some subjects were. You know, Lucas said while carefully gluing a stick, I always thought math and physics were boring. But when you see practical applications, like in this bridge, it becomes interesting. Exactly, David agreed. Theory makes sense when we understand its purpose. Ethan, Lucas said, you're lucky to learn these things from such a young age. I only discovered I liked engineering last year. You're going to be an amazing engineer, Ethan said sincerely. And if you want, I can teach you more about Lego. You can make incredible things. Lucas laughed. I'm in. It's been a while since I played with Lego. Sarah called everyone to dinner when the prototype was almost finished. The table was set simply and lovingly. Colourful plates, cloth napkins, and a centerpiece with small flowers she grew on the balcony. I hope you like lasagna, Sarah said, bringing a steaming dish from the kitchen. My mom makes the best lasagna in the world, Lucas commented proudly. What a delicious smell, Ethan exclaimed. My dad can't cook lasagna. Hey, David protested, laughing. I can make several things. That's true, Ethan agreed. Dad makes the best grilled cheese sandwich in the world. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally. Lucas shared his plans for the future. Ethan talked about school and his projects with his dad, and Sarah and David exchanged knowing smiles several times. Aunt Sarah, Ethan said at one point, can Lucas come visit our house too? I can show him my Lego workshop. Of course he can if he wants to, Sarah replied. That would be cool, Lucas said, and you can teach me more about building. David felt a wave of emotion. Seeing Ethan and Lucas getting along, watching Sarah interact naturally with his son, he began to envision possibilities that had previously seemed like distant dreams. After dinner, while the two boys finished the bridge in Lucas's room, Sarah and David stayed in the kitchen, washing the dishes together. How are you feeling? Sarah asked softly. Honestly, better than I expected. Lucas is a fantastic kid, Sarah. You did an amazing job raising him. Thank you. And Ethan he's just too special. The way he connects with Lucas, how he shows genuine interest. You should be proud. I am. But I have to admit, I'm surprised by one thing. What? David stopped drying the dish he was holding, looking directly at her. How natural this feels. How our families fit together. Sarah blushed slightly. I noticed that too. It's like, as it always should have been, David completed. They moved closer naturally, and this time, without interruptions from children or urgent commitments, David gathered the courage to gently touch Sarah's face. Sarah, may I kiss you? I was hoping you would ask, she replied, smiling. The kiss was soft, filled with emotion and promises. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Dad! Aunt Sarah, come see. The bridge is ready and it held all of Lucas's books, Ethan shouted from the living room. They separated, laughing softly. Let's check out this engineering marvel, David said, holding Sarah's hand for a few seconds before letting go. David, she called before they left the kitchen. Yes, I'm really happy. Me too, Sarah, very happy. As they walked together to see the bridge the boys had built, they both knew they had taken an important step toward something bigger and more meaningful than either had imagined when they first met at school. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed filled with real and tangible possibilities. August brought a new and comforting routine for David and Sarah. Their meetings now happened, naturally, alternating weekends between the two houses, family dinners, and joint projects involving Ethan and Lucas. It was a Thursday night when Sarah made a revelation that deeply surprised David. They were in Sarah's living room after a quiet dinner. Ethan and Lucas were building an entire city out of building blocks in the teenagers' room, their excited voices echoing down the hallway. Sarah had prepared chamomile tea and was flipping through some papers she kept in a discreet folder next to her stacks of schoolwork to grade. "David, can I show you something?" she asked, hesitating slightly. "Of course. What is it about?" Sarah took a deep breath, as if she were making an important decision. "It's something very personal, something even Lucas doesn't really know." David leaned in, intrigued. "Now I'm curious. Promise you won't laugh?" "Sarah, you know I would never laugh at something important to you." She opened the folder, revealing handwritten pages with careful handwriting and simple drawings in the margins. "About 2 years ago, I started writing children's stories." David gently picked up one of the pages, reading the title, Anna and the Kingdom of Jumbled Words. His eyes scanned the first lines, which told the story of a girl with dyslexia who discovers a magical world where letters dance and rearrange to form special words. "Sarah, this is amazing," he exclaimed, genuinely impressed. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because it's just a hobby, a way to process my experiences with special needs children. I never thought about doing anything professional with it." David continued reading, fascinated by the sensitivity with which Sarah approached learning difficulties through fantasy. "How many stories do you have?" "About 15, all focused on children facing different challenges: dyslexia, hyperactivity, extreme shyness, motor difficulties. I try to show that each difficulty can also be a special superpower." "Sarah, this needs to be published. These are stories that can change the lives of many children." "Do you really think so?" she asked, blushing with pleasure and nervousness. "I'm sure. And you know what else? I think I know how to make this even more special." "How?" David smiled, an idea forming in his mind. "What if we illustrated them together? You with the stories, me with the drawings." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "You draw?" "I do. In fact, it's always been a secret passion. During engineering school, I did technical illustrations, but on weekends I drew for pleasure. When Ethan was little, I created some comic stories just for him." "Really? Why have you never mentioned this?" "For the same reason you didn't talk about your stories. I always thought it was just a personal hobby." Sarah stood up, excited. "Can you show me some drawings?" "I can bring them next time I come over, but I have a better idea." "What?" "How about we start a pilot project? We choose one of your stories, I do the illustrations, and we see how it turns out." Sarah's eyes sparkled. "You would really do that?" "I would do it with pleasure. In fact, I'm excited just thinking about the possibility." At that moment, Ethan appeared in the living room, interrupting the conversation. "Dad, can I sleep over tonight? Lucas said we can finish the building block city early tomorrow." David looked at Sarah, who nodded with a smile. "Sure, champ, but only if you don't give Aunt Sarah any trouble." "We promise," Lucas shouted from the room. "And Mum, can I make popcorn for us to watch a movie?" "You can," Sarah replied, "but choose something that Ethan will like too." When the boys got busy with the movie, David and Sarah returned to their conversation about the stories. "Which story do you think would be good to start with?" David asked. Sarah flipped through some pages, stopping at a specific one. "This one, Peter and the Maze of Words. It's about a boy who has difficulty reading but discovers that when he draws the words, they come to life and help him understand their meanings." "Perfect. It's almost a visual metaphor ready for illustration. And you, do you really think this could become something professional?" David gently took Sarah's hand. "Sarah, you have a gift for connecting with special needs children in a unique way. These stories capture exactly that, the idea that being different can be wonderful. Combined with illustrations that complement that message, yes, I think it could be something very special." "Where would we publish it?" "We can start small, maybe make some handmade copies to use at school, see how the children react. If it goes well, I know some people in the publishing industry who are interested in innovative educational projects. Sarah looked at him with growing admiration. How do you manage to turn my most secret dreams into real possibilities? The same way you turned Ethan's self-esteem into reality. Sometimes we just need someone who believes in us. For the next 2 hours, they planned the project with the enthusiasm of 2 children, discovering a new toy. Sarah told the complete story of Peter and the Maze of Words, while David took notes on visual elements and possible illustrations. I imagine each word gaining its own personality, David said, quickly sketching on a piece of paper. The word love could be represented by a heart with arms embracing Peter. And the word courage could be a friendly lion. And when Peter manages to read a complete sentence, all the words come together in a big celebration, Sarah added excitedly. Exactly. We can create a double-page spread showing the word party. When they finally decided to check on the kids, they found Ethan sleeping on the couch, covered with a blanket that Lucas had placed over him. The teenager was still awake, reading a science fiction book. Thank you for taking care of Ethan, David said, touched by the boy's kind gesture. No problem. He's really cool. He told me some stories about the projects you do together. You're a really cool dad, David. Thanks, Lucas. That means a lot to me. Sarah observed the scene, her heart filling with tenderness as she saw how the 2 families were naturally intertwining. Lucas, how about you get some sleep too? You can continue the projects tomorrow. Okay, Mom. Good night, David. Good night, Ethan, he whispered to the sleeping boy. When Lucas retreated to his room, Sarah and David were left alone in the living room, watching Ethan sleep peacefully. He looks so calm here, David murmured. Our home has become a special place for him too, Sarah replied. And for me, that is, what is it? It's as if we are finally building something I've always dreamed of, but never thought would be possible. David wrapped her in a warm embrace. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Go ahead. I'm falling in love not just with you, but with everything we're creating together. This feeling of family, the shared projects, the way our lives complement each other. I feel that too. And you know what else? What? For the first time in years, when I think about the future, I see wonderful possibilities instead of just responsibilities. They kissed softly, a kiss that carried promises and hopes for all the projects and dreams that were blossoming between them. David, Sarah whispered. Yes? Thank you for believing in my stories, and for wanting to illustrate them with me. Thank you for allowing me to be part of something so special. And Sarah? Yes? I can't wait to start our first story together. As they prepared for bed, David on the couch, Sarah in the bedroom, the kids comfortably settled, both knew they had discovered another dimension of their partnership. They were not just a couple getting to know each other, but creative collaborators ready to turn dreams into reality. And for the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine a future where love, work, family, and creativity blended harmoniously and rewarding. September arrived, bringing the first signs of spring and a growing restlessness in David's heart. For 3 weeks, he and Sarah had been working together on the children's book project, meeting twice a week to develop the illustrations for Peter and the Maze of Words. The drawings were turning out magnificent, and the synergy between them was evident. Sarah described her visions with poetic details, while David translated them into vibrant, colorful images. But it was precisely this perfect harmony that was making David nervous. His life had completely transformed in the past few months, and for the first time since the divorce, he found himself facing the real possibility of a new, serious relationship. The problem was that the closer he got to Sarah, the more daunting the prospect of being vulnerable again became. It was a Friday night, and David had invited Sarah over for dinner at his house. Ethan was spending the weekend at his maternal grandparents' house, a monthly arrangement they had maintained since the separation, and for the first time, he and Sarah would have a night completely alone, without kids, projects, or external responsibilities. David spent the entire day preparing everything with obsessive care. He cleaned the house twice, bought ingredients to make the mushroom risotto he had learned to prepare in a cooking class years before, and chose a playlist of instrumental Brazilian music that created a cozy atmosphere without being overly romantic. When Sarah arrived at 7 in the evening, wearing an emerald green dress and her hair down in natural waves, David felt his heart race. She brought a bottle of red wine and a smile that lit up her entire face. "Wow, it smells amazing," she exclaimed, kissing his cheek affectionately. "What are you making?" "Mushroom risotto. I hope you like mushrooms." "I love them. Can I help with anything?" "Actually, it's almost ready. How about some wine while I finish the last touches?" During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between the book project, plans for upcoming school activities, and personal stories they hadn't yet shared. Sarah talked about her childhood in Santa Monica, about how she decided to become a teacher after seeing her brother's struggles with Down syndrome. David spoke about his college years, how he met his ex-wife, and the challenges of rebuilding his life after the separation. "Can I ask a personal question?" Sarah said when they finished dessert, a chocolate lava cake that David had bought at the local French bakery. "Of course, always." "What went wrong in your marriage? You and Ethan seem so balanced." "It's hard to imagine there was a turbulent time." David sighed, absently stirring the rest of his wine. "Emily and I were very young when we got married. She was 22, I was 25. We thought love was enough to overcome any differences. And it wasn't. The love was there, yes, but we were very different people in fundamental ways. Emily always dreamed of an international life. She wanted to travel, live in other countries, have cosmopolitan experiences. I've always been more home-oriented, focused on building roots in a city, in a community." "And what about Ethan?" "Ethan changed everything. When he was born, for a while it seemed like we had found a balance, but as he grew and showed his learning difficulties, our differences became irreconcilable." Sarah furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" "Emily saw Ethan's dyslexia as a problem to be solved quickly and forgotten. She wanted to take him to expensive specialists, special schools, intensive treatments, everything to make him normal as fast as possible." "And you?" "I wanted to understand Ethan, accept his differences, find ways for him to thrive being exactly who he is. For me, dyslexia wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a characteristic to be understood and respected." Sarah gently took his hand. "And she couldn't see it that way." "No. And the discussions about it became constant. Emily thought I was being negligent, that I didn't want the best for our son. I thought she was trying to change Ethan's essence." "That must have been very painful." "It was. And the worst part is that deep down, each of us thought we were protecting Ethan, only we were doing it in completely incompatible ways." Sarah was silent for a few moments, processing the story. "And how did Ethan cope with the separation?" "Better than I expected, honestly. Emily moved to London 2 years ago. She got the international job she always wanted. She visits Ethan a few times a year, and they keep regular contact through video calls." "Does he miss her?" "He does. But he also flourished a lot after the home environment became calmer. Without the constant tensions, he relaxed and started to accept himself more." "And you, how do you feel about the divorce now?" David thought about the question, choosing his words carefully. "Sad about what didn't work out, but convinced it was the right decision. Emily is a wonderful person, but we weren't compatible to build a life together, and Ethan is much better now." "David, Can I ask you a more direct question? Sure. Are you afraid of getting seriously involved again? The question caught David off guard. He looked her in the eyes, seeing a vulnerability that mirrored his own. Why do you ask? Because sometimes I feel like you hold back, as if you're always ready to retreat if things get too complicated. David lowered his gaze, recognizing the truth in her observation. Maybe you're right. And why does that happen? Because he hesitated, struggling to verbalize fears he had kept buried. Because when you're a parent, any relationship you build directly affects your child, and I can't risk putting Ethan in an unstable situation again. I understand that. But David, don't you think you might be missing real opportunities out of fear of hypothetical risks? What do you mean? Sarah stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the small backyard garden. I mean that what we're building together, you, me, Ethan, and Lucas, it doesn't feel hypothetical. It feels very real and very special. David approached her. Sarah, you're right. It is special. In fact, it's the most important thing that's happened in my life since Ethan was born. So, why do I have the feeling that you're always 1 foot back? Because, David took a deep breath, deciding to be completely honest. Because I'm in love with you, Sarah. Really in love. And that terrifies me. She turned to face him. Why does it terrify you? Because when you truly fall in love, you become vulnerable. You can get hurt. And if I get hurt, Ethan can too. And what if you don't get hurt? What if this is exactly what you both need? Is it possible? Sarah moved closer to him, placing her hands on his face. David, can I tell you a secret? Of course. I'm in love too, madly in love, with you, with Ethan, with this life we're building together, and yes, it terrifies me too. Too? Because for 3 years, I built a life centered only on Lucas and work, because I got used to not depending on anyone emotionally, and now I can't imagine my life without you. They looked at each other in silence, both recognizing they had reached a decisive moment. Sarah, David said softly, what do we do with this fear? I think we face it together, because what I feel for you is greater than any fear. Even knowing it will be complicated at times, that we have 2 kids to think about, careers to balance, past stories to overcome, especially because of that. David, we're not in our 20s anymore. We know that true love isn't about overwhelming passions and impossible promises. It's about building something solid, day by day, based on respect, compatibility, and mutual care. And do you think we have that? I know we do. I see it in the way you treat Ethan, how you respect my opinions, how dedicated you are to our projects. I see it in how safe and happy I feel when I'm with you. David kissed her then, a deep kiss filled with emotion, as if sealing a promise. When they pulled away, Sarah whispered, David, can I ask you one thing? Anything. Stop being afraid of being happy. You deserve it. Ethan deserves it. We deserve it. And if it doesn't work out? And if it does, what if it's exactly what we've been looking for without knowing? David smiled, feeling a lightness in his chest he hadn't experienced in years. Sarah? Yes? I love you, completely without reservations, with all my fears and all my hopes. I love you too, David. And you know what else? What? I'm sure we're going to make it work, because we already are. That night, for the first time, David allowed himself to dream of a future without fears, where love and responsibility harmonized, where 2 families became one, and where happiness was not a distant possibility, but a tangible and growing reality. And as he fell asleep next to Sarah, He knew he had finally found the December arrived with the typical warmth of a summer day in Los Angeles and a feeling of completeness that David never imagined was possible. In the last weeks of November, he and Sarah had finished Peter and the Maze of Words, 15 pages of text and illustrations that perfectly captured the magic of turning challenges into discoveries. The result had exceeded both of their expectations. It was a Tuesday, exactly 9 months after their first meeting at Joe Bennett's bakery, when Sarah called David with a trembling voice full of emotion. "David, you need to sit down before you hear what I have to tell you." "What happened? Is everything okay?" "More than okay. Little Big Dreams Publishing just called. They want to publish our book." David nearly spilled the coffee he was drinking. "Seriously, how did that happen?" "Remember that copy I took to show at the educational meeting? The district coordinator was so impressed that she sent it to a friend who works at the publishing house. They want a meeting tomorrow." "Sarah, this is unbelievable. Our first book is going to be published." "Our first book," she repeated, smiling through the line. "I love how that sounds." The next morning, David and Sarah met in front of the office building in Greenpoint, where Little Big Dreams Publishing was located. Both were nervous and excited, carrying a folder with all the original pages and some ideas for future projects. Mary Johnson, the editorial director, was a 45-year-old woman with elegantly cut grey hair and a contagious enthusiasm for inclusive children's literature. "You two have created something very special," she said, carefully flipping through the pages. "I rarely see such perfect harmony between text and illustration. Each drawing tells its own story, but together they form a powerful narrative." "Thank you," Sarah replied, still barely believing the compliment. "It was a very organic process. David could visualize exactly what I imagined. And Sarah has a unique sensitivity to turn real challenges into magical adventures," David added. Mary smiled. "It's exactly this synergy that we want in our editorial line. We have a specific focus on books that help children understand and accept themselves." The meeting extended for 2 hours, covering publication details, production schedules, and future possibilities. When they left the building, Sarah and David could hardly contain their euphoria. "I can't believe our first story is going to be a real book," Sarah exclaimed, walking through the streets of Greenpoint as if she were floating. "And she already wants a proposal for a complete series, 15 books about special children." "David, do you realize what this means? We can help hundreds, maybe thousands of children who feel different, and we can do this together as creative partners and... David stopped walking, looking directly at Sarah. "Sarah, I need to tell you something important." "What is it? Are you worried about something in the contract?" "It's not about the book, it's about us." Sarah noticed the seriousness in his tone and became more attentive. "David, you're making me nervous. These 9 months have been the most important of my life since Ethan was born. You have not only become the most important person to me, but you have transformed our lives in ways I never knew were possible." "David, let me finish, please. Sarah, you taught me that it's possible to love without fear, that it's possible to build something solid based on respect and partnership. You showed me that Ethan can have a bigger and more loving family." "Where are you going with this?" David took a deep breath, pulling a small velvet box from his suit pocket. "I want to get to the point that I can't imagine my life without you, that I want to build everything we've started in an official and permanent way." Sarah's eyes widened as he knelt right there on the sidewalk of Harmony Street, under the shade of a blooming cherry blossom tree. "Sarah Rodriguez, will you marry me? Will you officially form a family with me and Ethan? Will you be my partner in life, in books, in dreams, and in everything that comes our way?" Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she extended her hand for him to place the ring, a simple and elegant band with a small emerald that reminded her of her eye color. "Yes, of course, David. I love you so much." He stood up and kissed her, while some passers-by spontaneously applauded. It was a scene from a movie, but completely real and unique for them. "But we have to tell the kids together," Sarah said, when she managed to stop crying from emotion. "I've already thought about that. How about we all have dinner together tonight? We can share the news about the book and our news, too." "Perfect, but David..." "Yes? I'm nervous about their reaction." "Me too. But look at everything we've built so far. Ethan and Lucas already consider themselves brothers. Our routine already works like a family. We're just making official something that already exists." That night, at David's house, the four gathered for what would be remembered as one of the most important conversations of their lives. Ethan and Lucas immediately noticed that something special was in the air. Sarah was radiant, David was constantly smiling, and both seemed to be keeping exciting secrets. "Guys," David began after dinner, "Aunt Sarah and I have some news to share." "Good news or bad news?" Ethan asked, always direct. "Very good," Sarah laughed. "Two incredible pieces of news. The first," David said, "is that our book, Peter and the Maze of Words, is going to be published by a real publishing house." "Seriously?" exclaimed both boys simultaneously. "Seriously," Sarah confirmed, "and we're going to do a whole series of books about special children." "That's awesome!" "Can I tell my friends at school?" Ethan asked. "Of course you can," David said, "but there's one more piece of news." Sarah extended her hand, showing the ring. "David proposed to me today, and I said yes." There was a moment of absolute silence. Ethan looked at Lucas, looked at his parents, and then Ethan shouted, "Yay! Does that mean Lucas is going to be my official brother?" "If you both want," replied Sarah, excited. "Of course we want," said Lucas, getting up to hug Ethan. "I've always wanted a younger brother." "And I've always wanted an older brother to teach me teenage stuff," replied Ethan. David and Sarah exchanged glances, tears of happiness in their eyes. Everything was falling into place perfectly. "When are you two going to get married?" asked Lucas. "We haven't decided yet," said Sarah. "How about March, in spring?" "In March I'll be 9 years old," said Ethan. "Can it be on my birthday?" "I think we can have 2 separate parties," laughed David. "But close together." The rest of the evening flew by, with the 4 of them planning the new life they would have together. They decided that Sarah and Lucas would move into David's house, which was bigger and had a backyard where they could expand the garden and create a workspace for books. 2 weeks later, on a sunny December morning, David and Sarah met again at Bella Vista Bakery. It was a special meeting. They wanted to share the news with the man who had predicted months earlier that they were perfect for each other. "Good morning, my dears," greeted Joe when he saw them arriving together. "How are you today?" "Very well, Mr. Bennett," replied Sarah, smiling. "Actually, we have some news to share." Joe immediately noticed the ring on Sarah's hand. His eyes widened, and he began gesturing enthusiastically. "Oh my, you're getting married. I knew it. I knew it from the first day." "You were right about destiny and soulmates," said David, laughing. "Of course, my grandmother always said, 'True love always finds its way.' And look at you two, a beautiful family." Joe insisted on preparing a special coffee to celebrate, and for the next hour they talked about the book, the wedding plans, and how their lives had transformed. "You know what's even more beautiful," said Joe at the end. "You didn't change who you were to be together. You discovered that you were already perfect for each other." "That's true," agreed Sarah. "I never felt like I needed to be different to be with David." "Neither did I with Sarah," added David. "It's like we're 2 pieces that fit together naturally." As they left the bakery, walking through the streets of Greenpoint where they had discovered love, David took Sarah's hand. "Sarah?" "Yes." "Thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For believing in my designs, for sharing your stories with me, for accepting Lucas into your life, for teaching me to love without fear, for everything." Sarah stopped and kissed him gently. "Thank you for turning my secret hobby into reality, for accepting Lucas as your son, for making me believe that family can be built with love and not just blood." As they walked together toward the future, they both knew that the simple note found in the school backpack had truly been the beginning of something magical, not just a romance, but the building of a family based on love, respect, creativity, and the understanding that the best things in life happen when we least expect them. The first book would be released in March, along with the wedding. 15 other books were planned for the next 3 years. Ethan was thriving at school and at home. Lucas had found a mentor in David and a brother in Ethan. And Sarah and David discovered that true love is not just a feeling, but partnership, a joint project, and the courage to build something beautiful together.